My name is Richard Cole. Once upon a time, that name carried weight. I was the man people call successful, the man who signed in contracts in glass towers, who drove luxury cars and took vacations in places most people only saw on postcards. I was a husband, a provider, and for a while I thought I was untouchable. Today, no one says my name with respect. Most don't say it at all. They walk past me as I sit on the corner with a paper cup layered in coats I found in donation bins, my face lined and weathered from too many nights under the open sky. To them, I am just another homeless man, another shadow to avoid. But I wasn't always this way. My story began in light, in love, and in success. It was a story of triumph until a single day, a single accident, turned it all into ashes. I was born in Ohio, the son of a mechanic and a school secretary. We didn't have much, but we had enough. My father taught me the value of hard work with grease-stained hands, and my mother taught me discipline with her steady presence. From them, I inherited grit and ambition. Those qualities carried me far. I earned scholarships, studied business, and climbed the corporate ladder with relentless determination. By the time I was 40, I had built a company of my own, Cole Logistics. Trucks with my name on their sides crisscrossed the country. My office sat high above the city skyline, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view I had once dreamed of as a boy staring out of a cracked bedroom window. Money flowed, deals closed, and with each success my sense of invincibility grew. But money, as powerful as it is, wasn't the best thing I ever gained. The best thing came one summer evening at a charity event when I met Laura. She was standing near the buffet table, laughing at something a friend had said, her smile lighting up the room brighter than the chandeliers. I introduced myself clumsily, stammering despite all my boardroom confidence. She teased me for being nervous, and from that moment, I was hooked. Laura wasn't impressed by my money or my status. She cared about who I was underneath the suit. She had a way of grounding me, of reminding me that success meant nothing without someone to share it with. Within a year, we were married. Within 3, we were building a life that felt both ordinary and extraordinary. Ordinary because we cooked dinner together, argued about silly things, and laughed over late-night movies. Extraordinary because I was deeply, completely in love with her. Together, we built more than a home. We built a future. Vacations to the coast, holidays with family, quiet mornings with coffee, and the newspaper spread out between us. We dreamed about the children we might have, the places we would see, the years ahead of us. I thought we had forever. But forever is fragile. The day everything changed started like any other. Laura and I were set to fly out for a short trip, a mix of business and pleasure. She had teased me the night before saying, "Richard, you'll spend the whole time checking your phone, but at least I'll get to see the ocean." I promised her I'd make time, that this trip would be different. We packed our bags, kissed goodbye to our home, and headed to the airport. Neither of us knew it would be the last time we'd walk through that front door together. I remember sitting beside her on the plane, her hand resting on mine, her smile calm as she flipped through a magazine. I remember the sound of the engines roaring, the flight attendant's practiced smile, the hum of conversation around us. Everything felt so normal, so safe. And then, in an instant, it wasn't. But that part of the story, the crash, the fire, the screams, that comes later. For now, you need to understand who I was before it all fell apart. My name is Richard Cole. I was a husband. I was a businessman. I was a man with everything. And then, in one terrible moment, I became a man with nothing. Before the crash, before the streets, my life was measured in contracts, profits, and milestones. Success wasn't just something I chased, it was the air I breathed. Every day felt like a race, and for years I was ahead of everyone else. I built Cole Logistics from the ground up. What started with a single leased truck and an office the size of a closet grew into a company with fleets across the Midwest, warehouses in multiple states, and contracts with some of the biggest retailers in the country. People called me a visionary, but I knew the truth. I was just relentless. While others slept, I planned routes, negotiated deals, studied markets. I sacrificed weekends, skipped holidays, and poured every ounce of myself into the business. and it paid off. By the time I was in my 40s, I had more money than I ever thought possible. My home was a sprawling estate with manicured lawns and a driveway long enough that you could barely see the street. Inside, there were marble floors, chandeliers, and a study lined with books I never had time to read. I drove luxury cars, wore tailored suits, and dined in restaurants where the menus didn't bother listing prices. Success gave me freedom. If Laura wanted to see Paris, we went. If she wanted to remodel the house, it was done. Birthdays, anniversaries, holidays. I showered her with gifts that sparkled in velvet boxes. She would laugh and tell me I was overdoing it, but the joy in her eyes always made me keep going. Still, money wasn't just about comfort, it was about recognition. When I walked into a room, people noticed. They leaned in when I spoke, eager to be associated with the man who had built an empire. Invitations to galas, charity events, and board meetings filled my calendar. Success put me in circles I had once only dreamed of entering. But it came at a cost. I was gone more often than I was home. Late nights at the office blurred into early mornings at airports. Laura sometimes joked that she needed to book an appointment just to have dinner with me. I laughed it off, promising to slow down someday. But someday never came. In my mind, fine, there was always one more deal, one more expansion, one more mountain to climb. I told myself it was for her, for us, that every hour I spent away was an investment in our future. And in a way, it was true. Laura never wanted for anything. But what she really wanted was more of me, and I was too blinded by ambition to see it clearly. Despite the imbalance, we built a life of comfort and prestige. Weekends, when I was home, we hosted dinners in our backyard. Friends gathered under twinkling lights strung across the patio, glasses of wine in hand, laughter filling the night. Laura thrived in those moments, gracious and warm, the heart of every gathering. Watching her, I often thought, this is what success is for, to give her this life. We traveled to Hawaii, Italy, the Caribbean. Photos of us smiling against turquoise waters and ancient ruins filled albums on our shelves. I looked at those pictures often, reminders that beneath the boardrooms and contracts, there were still moments of joy. Yet even in paradise, I carried my phone, checking emails, fielding calls. Laura teased me for it, but she never complained outright. She understood the machine I had built and the demands it made. She believed in me, even when I failed to be present. Looking back now, I realize how fragile that life was. It seemed so solid, built on wealth and power, but in truth, it was a house of cards. One gust of tragedy, and it all collapsed. When people see me now, sitting on the corner with my paper cup, they can't imagine the life I once lived. They see rags and assume there were never riches. They see a broken man and assume there was never strength. But both are true. I was once the man at the head of the table, the one signing checks, the one shaking hands under chandeliers. Success defined me for so long that I thought it was permanent. I thought money was armor, status was unshakable. I thought I had built a future no accident, no disaster could erase. I was wrong. Because success is fragile. It doesn't vanish slowly, it shatters in an instant. And when it does, you learn that the world only values you as long as you can keep producing, keep climbing, keep winning. The life of success I built gave me everything. But it also blinded me to how quickly everything can be taken away. And soon I would learn just how cruelly fate can turn. Money may have built the walls around my life, but Laura filled them with light. She wasn't just my wife, she was my anchor, my compass, the one who reminded me who I was beneath the suits and the endless deals. Without her, success would have been nothing more than an empty trophy case. I met her at a charity fundraiser, one of those events where everyone wore polished smiles and tried to outdo each other with pledges. I remember scanning the room, thinking about potential business contacts, when my eyes fell on her. She stood out instantly, not because she was the most glamorous woman in the room, but because she was the most genuine. She laughed with her whole face, listened intently when others spoke, and carried herself with a grace that made everyone feel at ease. I walked over with all the confidence of a man used to closing deals. But when I introduced myself, my voice stumbled. She raised an eyebrow and said, "Richard Cole, the logistics guy? I hear you run half the trucks in the Midwest." I chuckled, embarrassed. "Something like that. And you are?" "Laura Bennett." she said, extending her hand, and I don't run anything. I'm just here because my friend dragged me along. That was Laura, unimpressed by wealth, unimpressed by titles. She didn't care about the size of my company or the number of zeros in my bank account. She cared about people, about stories, about simple joys. We talked the whole evening, not about business, but about books, travel, music. I found myself laughing in a way I hadn't in years. By the end of the night, I knew I couldn't let her slip away. I asked her to dinner, half expecting her to decline. She smiled and said, "Only if you promise not to bring your phone." It was the beginning of everything. Our courtship was quick but deep. I was busy, always busy, but Laura had a way of slowing me down. She dragged me out of the office for picnics in the park, convinced me to take weekends away, remind me that life wasn't just about contracts and deadlines. "Richard," she'd say, "you're not going to measure your life in meetings. You'll measure it in moments. Don't miss them." We married within a year. The ceremony was small, family, close friends, nothing extravagant. I could have afforded a ballroom, 100 guests, a champagne tower, but Laura insisted on something simple. "It's not about the show," she told me. "It's about us." And when I saw her walking down the aisle in her ivory dress, eyes shining, I knew she was right. Married life was a balance. I worked long hours chasing expansion, while she built a home that was warm and welcoming. She painted the walls with colors I never would have chosen, but that somehow felt perfect. She filled the shelves with books, the kitchen with the smell of fresh bread, the living room with plants I inevitably forgot to water. Our home wasn't just a house, it was a sanctuary, because she made it one. Laura had dreams too. She wanted to see the world, to travel beyond the boardrooms and airports that defined my life. She made lists of cities and countries, folded maps into guidebooks, circled places in magazines. Sometimes she'd spread them out on the dining room table and say, "One day, Richard, one day we'll go everywhere." And we did, at least some of them. Paris in the spring, Rome in the fall, beaches in the Caribbean. I always carried my phone, always stole moments to check emails, but Laura never complained. She just slipped her hand into mine and pointed at the horizon, as if to remind me there was more to life than what fit on a screen. She also grounded me in ways money never could. When I bought her expensive jewelry, she'd smile politely, then set it aside to gush over a handwritten note I'd tucked into her bag. When I drove home in a brand new car, she'd say, "It's nice, Richard, but I'd rather have you here for dinner." She never let me forget that love wasn't about things. It was about presence. Looking back now, I realize I built my fortune with relentless drive, but Laura built our life with patience, love, and laughter. She was the better half of us in every way. She reminded me of who I wanted to be, not just what I wanted to achieve. And then in one cruel twist of fate, she was gone. It still feels unreal to say it, that Laura, the heart of my life, died in that crash. One moment she was beside me, flipping through a magazine, her hand resting on mine. The next, chaos swallowed her, and she never came back. Losing my fortune hurt. Losing my home, my company, my status, it all cut deep. But losing Laura shattered me, because without her, all the rest was meaningless. She was the love of my life. And when she was taken, I lost more than a wife. I lost the anchor that kept me from drifting, the compass that gave me direction, the light that made all the success worth chasing. It started as a trip like any other. Laura and I had traveled dozens of times before. Business meetings in New York, summer escapes to Italy, quick getaways to the coast. This one was supposed to be a mix of both. A business deal in California that I had been chasing for months, followed by a short vacation on the coast. Laura insisted on coming along, eager to see the ocean and spend time together. "You're not going to bury yourself in work the whole time, are you?" she asked me as we packed our bags. I smiled, sliding my laptop into its case. "Maybe just a little, but I promise, Laura, this time will be different. After the meeting, it'll just be us." She raised an eyebrow, skeptical, but kissed me anyway. "I'll believe it when I see it." We packed light, suits for me, sundresses for her, and one small suitcase filled with guidebooks and sunscreen she had bought the week before. She had circled beaches on the map, places she wanted to walk barefoot at sunset. I teased her for being too romantic. But the truth was, I looked forward to those moments too. At the airport, everything felt routine. The hum of announcements, the clatter of rolling suitcases, the smell of coffee drifting from kiosks. It was the background music of my life. I had flown so often that airports felt like second homes. But this time was different because Laura was beside me. She leaned against my shoulder as we waited at the gate, flipping through a magazine, pointing out places she wanted to visit someday. Paris again, she said, tapping a picture of the Eiffel Tower. But this time, no work calls. I laughed. Deal. Boarding began and we found our seats, a pair near the wing, window for her, aisle for me. Laura always liked the window seat. She said watching the world shrink beneath her reminded her how small our problems really were. I envied that perspective. The plane lifted smoothly, engines roaring, city lights fading beneath us. Laura pressed her forehead to the glass, smiling at the view. I pulled out my laptop, habit too strong to resist. She nudged me gently. Richard, not now. Just be here with me. So I closed it. For once, I listened. We talked quietly, laughed about old memories, planned what we'd do when we landed. She wanted seafood by the ocean, a walk on the beach, a lazy morning without alarms. I promised her all of it, but promises can be fragile things. An hour into the flight, the turbulence started. At first, it was nothing unusual, a few jolts, the seatbelt sign blinking on. Passengers murmured but stayed calm. Laura squeezed my hand, her eyes steady. It's fine, she whispered. Then the jolts grew harder. Drinks spilled, bags rattled in overhead compartments. The plane lurched violently, a shudder running through its body like something had snapped. Gasps filled the cabin. A baby cried. The flight attendant's smiles tightened into fear. I felt Laura's grip tighten on my hand. Her eyes searched mine, wide and terrified, though she tried to mask it. Richard, she whispered. And then came the sound I will never forget, a deafening bang, followed by the grinding roar of engines failing. The plane tilted sharply, screams erupting all around us. Oxygen masks dropped, swaying like pendulums of doom. My own breath caught in my throat. The air suddenly thin. Chaos swallowed the cabin. Passengers fumbled with masks, clutched each other, prayed aloud. The flight attendants shouted instructions I couldn't hear over the roar. Laura's hand clung to mine with desperate force, her nails digging into my skin. Look at me, she cried. Richard, look at me. I turned, forcing myself to meet her eyes. For a moment, the world narrowed to just us, her face pale but steady, her lips trembling but brave. I love you, she said, her voice breaking. I love you too, I whispered back. The plane dropped, a sickening plunge that tore screams from every throat. Lights flickered, luggage flew from overhead, striking passengers. I wrapped my arm around Laura, trying to shield her, as if I could protect her from the sky itself collapsing. And then, darkness. I don't remember the impact, just the sound of tearing metal, the violent crash, the screams cut short. After that, nothing. A silence so absolute it felt like the world itself had ended. When I opened my eyes again, everything was different. When I woke, the world was fire and smoke. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. The air was thick, acrid, filling my lungs with burning pain. My ears rang with a high-pitched whine, drowning out everything else. My body was twisted at an awkward angle, strapped to a seat that no longer seemed attached to anything. It took me several seconds to remember. The plane, Laura. Panic surged through me. I forced my eyes open wider, blinking against the smoke. Around me, chaos stretched in every direction. Shattered seats, twisted metal, luggage strewn across scorched earth. Flames licked at broken wings, black smoke billowing into the sky. People moaned, cried, some silent in ways that told me all I needed to know. I tried to move, my body screaming in protest. Pain shot through my leg, but I managed to unclip the seatbelt. My hands shook as I pushed myself upright, staggering onto the uneven ground. My head swam, dizziness threatening to pull me back under. But I couldn't stop. I had to find her. Laura! My voice cracked, lost in the roar of fire and the cries of survivors. Laura! I stumbled through wreckage, pushing aside debris, my heart pounding louder than the ringing in my ears. A woman reached out to me, her face bloodied, whispering for help. I knelt for a moment, dragging her away from the flames, but my eyes kept searching, desperate, frantic. And then I saw her. Laura lay a few yards away, her body twisted unnaturally, pinned beneath a piece of fuselage. Her eyes were closed, her skin pale, her lips parted as if she had tried to call my name. I dropped to my knees beside her, adrenaline flooding me. Laura, stay with me. Please, stay with me. I clawed at the metal with trembling hands, ignoring the searing pain in my arms, the cuts on my skin. The debris wouldn't budge. I screamed for help, my voice hoarse, but in the chaos no one came. Her eyes fluttered open for a brief second, and I saw her. My wife. My light. She tried to speak, but only a faint sound escaped. I leaned close, straining to hear. I love you, she whispered. And then she was gone. I froze, my body shaking violently. The fire roared louder, smoke choking the air. But all I could see was her face, lifeless in my arms. I screamed until my throat tore, until the world blurred through tears. I begged her to wake up, begged God, begged anyone listening. But the silence that followed was final. Rescue teams arrived eventually, sirens, flashing lights, shouts in the distance. Hands pulled me away, strong arms dragging me towards safety. I fought them, screaming Laura's name, trying to break free, but they held me tight. I remember one voice shouting, "We can't save her. She's gone." The words shattered what little strength I had left. Hours blurred into days. In the hospital, I drifted in and out of consciousness, haunted by the memory of her final whisper. Doctors spoke around me, bandaging wounds, monitoring my vitals. I barely listened. None of it mattered. Laura was gone. News reports called it a tragic aviation accident, listing numbers, casualties, survivors, causes under investigation. To the world, it was a headline. To me, it was the end of everything. When they asked if I had family to contact, I shook my head. Laura had been my family. Without her, there was no one. Friends sent messages, colleagues offered condolences, but their words felt hollow. They didn't know what it was to hold your wife in your arms and feel her slip away. The company sent flowers. The insurance called about claims. Lawyers reached out about lawsuits. None of it pierced the fog of grief. I sat in my hospital bed, clutching Sarah's old drawing, the one I had carried in my bag, and thought about how quickly life could unravel. One moment, you're planning dinners by the ocean. The next, you're counting breaths in a world that no longer makes sense. I should have died with her. That thought haunted me every day. Why had I survived when she hadn't? Why was I cursed to carry the memory of her last words, her last breath, burned into my soul? The crash didn't just take Laura, it took me too. The man who emerged from those flames wasn't Richard Cole, the husband, the businessman, the success story. He was something else, something hollow. And though I didn't realize it yet, the crash had also taken more than my wife. It had taken the fortune I had spent a lifetime building. Because tragedy doesn't end at impact. It ripples outward, tearing apart everything in its path. When I woke in the hospital after the crash, the silence was suffocating. Not the absence of sound. Machines beeped steadily. Nurses moved quietly through the halls. Doors clicked open and shut. It was the absence of her. For years, Laura's presence had been the background music of my life. Her laughter in the kitchen, her voice on the phone, her footsteps in the hall. Waking without it felt like waking in a world that had lost its color. The first thing I noticed was the smell, antiseptic, sharp, and clean. The second was the weight of blankets, heavy on my bruised body. My leg was bandaged, my ribs wrapped tight, cuts stitched across my arms. Pain radiated everywhere, but I barely felt it. Pain was nothing compared to the emptiness gnawing at me. A doctor entered, clipboard in hand, his expression professional but cautious. "Mr. Cole," he said softly, "you're very lucky to be alive." I wanted to laugh, but the sound caught in my throat. Lucky? Was it luck to watch your wife die? Was it luck to feel her last breath on your cheek? I turned my head toward the window, unwilling to meet his eyes. He continued, explaining my injuries, the treatments, the recovery process. His words blurred, meaningless syllables filling the air. I didn't care about broken bones or torn muscles. I cared about the empty space beside me, the silence where Laura should have been. When he finally stopped, I forced the question out. My voice cracked, raw from smoke and screaming. "Where is my wife?" The doctor hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. Still, I waited, desperate for a miracle. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "She didn't survive the crash." The words hit harder than the impact of the plane itself. My chest tightened, breath shallow, vision blurred. I turned my face into the pillow and wept, the sound muffled but unstoppable. Nurses stepped back, giving me space, but there was no space wide enough to contain that grief. For days, I drifted in and out of consciousness. Each time I opened my eyes, I hoped it had been a nightmare. Each time, reality came crashing back. Flowers filled the room, bouquets from colleagues, baskets from friends. Cards lined the table with words like condolences and thoughts and prayers. None of it mattered. None of it brought her back. The hospital chaplain visited once. He sat by my bed, hands folded, speaking gently about faith, about hope, about the belief that Laura was in a better place. I listened politely, then turned away. If there was a better place, why wasn't I there with her? Why had I been spared while she was taken? Reporters camped outside the hospital. News outlets wanted survivor stories, sound bites, a face for the tragedy. Nurses shielded me from them, but I heard their voices echoing in the halls. "Richard Cole, CEO of Cole Logistics, survives deadly crash." Survives. The word felt like an insult. I wasn't a survivor. I was the living half of a broken whole. When I was finally discharged, they wheeled me out the hospital doors into a world that felt alien. The sky was too blue, the air too fresh, the city too alive. Everything carried on as though nothing had happened, as though dozens of lives hadn't ended in fire and smoke. People bustled on sidewalks, horns blared in traffic, children laughed in playgrounds. And I stood there, hollow, clutching a bag of belongings, wondering how the world could move on when mine had stopped. The funeral was closed casket. There wasn't enough left of Laura to lay out the way she deserved. I sat in the front row, hands trembling, staring at the coffin draped in flowers. People spoke, friends, family, even colleagues, but their voices washed over me like static. I heard only one voice in my head, hers, whispering, "I love you," in those final seconds. After the service, mourners shook my hand, embraced me, offered words of comfort. She was a wonderful woman. "She'll be missed. We're here for you, man." I nodded, thanked them, but inside I was screaming. None of them understood. None of them had watched her die. None of them had felt her slip away. When the crowd dispersed and the cemetery grew quiet, I stayed behind. I knelt by the grave, my suit wrinkled, my bandages visible beneath the sleeves. "I should have saved you," I whispered. "I should have gone with you." My tears soaked the soil as the sun dipped low. That night, I returned to an empty house. The silence hit me harder than any wound. Her shoes still sat by the door. Her perfume lingered in the air. Her coffee mug was on the counter, half full, as if she would walk in any moment and finish it. I wandered from room to room, calling her name, desperate to hear her voice one more time. But only silence answered. And in that silence, I realized the truth. The crash hadn't just taken Laura's life. It had taken mine too. I was alive, yes, but without her, I no longer knew how to live. Survival, people say, is a blessing. After the crash, that's what I kept hearing. "You're lucky to be alive." Lucky. The word echoed in my head like a cruel joke. I didn't feel lucky. I felt punished. Yes, I had survived, but survival came with a cost far greater than death. It came with grief that gnawed at me day and night, with memories that burned like open wounds, with the unbearable guilt of knowing Laura was gone and I was still here. Every time I looked in the mirror, I asked the same question. Why her and not me? At first, the world seemed eager to surround me. Friends called, colleagues visited, the company sent support. There were dinners where people clinked glasses and toasted to new beginnings. There were condolences wrapped in polished words, handshakes that lingered too long, eyes that avoided mine when they didn't know what else to say. But sympathy has a short shelf life. As weeks turned into months, the calls slowed. Visitors stopped coming. People moved on, as they always do. My tragedy became yesterday's news, another story pushed aside for fresher headlines. And I was left alone with my ghosts. The company, the empire I had built, didn't escape the crash either. With Laura gone, my focus shattered. Meetings blurred together. Contracts slipped through my fingers. I sat at my desk, staring at numbers I couldn't make sense of. My mind drifting back to the plane, the fire, the way her hand clutched mine before it all went dark. Board members grew restless. Investors lost confidence. Richard, they said gently, we understand you're grieving, but the company needs leadership. They spoke of transitions, of restructuring. I saw the pity in their eyes, but beneath it, I saw impatience. To them, I wasn't Richard Cole, the visionary, anymore. I was a liability. Then came the lawsuits. Families of other victims filed claims against the airline, against the manufacturers, against anyone they thought might bear responsibility. Because I was a survivor, and because I had money, they pulled me into the storm. Lawyers circled like vultures, each promising justice, each demanding time and money I no longer had the strength to give. Insurance claims dragged on. Settlements were delayed. My wealth, once a fortress, began to crumble. Medical bills from my recovery ate away at savings. Legal fees drained accounts. Investments I had once considered untouchable faltered. The fortune I had built over decades slipped through my fingers, one expense, one lawsuit, one bad quarter at a time. And with the fortune went the life I had known. The marble house became a burden I could no longer carry. Maintaining it, paying staff, keeping up appearances, it was impossible. The estate agent spoke in hushed tones about market value, about downsizing. I walked through those empty rooms one last time, my footsteps echoing off marble floors, memories clinging to every wall. Laura's laughter in the kitchen, dinners by the fireplace, quiet mornings on the patio. Selling the house felt like burying her all over again. Friends who once filled those rooms disappeared too. They stopped inviting me to parties, stopped returning calls. Grief made people uncomfortable. Bankruptcy made them vanish entirely. No one wanted to be reminded how quickly fortune could turn to dust. Even family drifted. Relatives offered kind words but kept their distance, as if my tragedy was contagious. I became the story whispered at gatherings, the cautionary tale. Did you hear about Richard? Poor man, lost his wife in that crash. And then everything else too. The price of survival was isolation. Nights were the worst. Alone in a small apartment I had rented after selling the estate, I sat in the dark staring at Laura's photos. Her smile mocked me. Her eyes asked questions I couldn't answer. Whiskey dulled the edges for a while, but the pain always returned sharper than before. Sometimes I prayed not to wake up. But every morning I did. And that was the cruelest part. Survival meant waking up each day to a life that no longer felt like mine. Survival meant carrying the weight of Laura's last words, I love you, and knowing I hadn't saved her. Survival meant losing not just her, but the fortune, the home, the company, the respect, until all that remained was a broken man no one recognized. People envied me once. They saw the cars, the house, the lifestyle, and thought I had everything. But if they saw me now, sitting on a park bench with nothing but a paper cup and a torn coat, they wouldn't envy me at all. Because this is the truth no one wants to admit. Sometimes survival is worse than death. Grief is not a single wound. It is thousands of tiny cuts that never heal, each one opening again at the smallest reminder. After the crash, I carried those cuts everywhere. Every sound, every smell, every place I visited became another blade twisting inside me. At first, I thought grief would come in waves, that there would be moments of calm between storms. But I learned quickly that grief is not so kind. It clings like a second skin, suffocating, relentless. The weight of it pressed down on me day and night until I could barely breathe. The mornings were the hardest. I used to wake to Laura's voice, her soft "good morning" whispered against my cheek. Now I woke to silence, to the echo of her absence. I would roll over in bed, reaching instinctively for her, only to find cold sheets. That single moment, the empty space where she should have been, set the tone for the day. I stopped answering calls. Friends reached out less and less, and when they did, their voices were filled with discomfort. They didn't know what to say, and I didn't know how to listen. Time heals all wounds, they told me, but time didn't heal. It only deepened the hollow place inside me. Isolation became easier than pretending. I shut the world out, closing blinds, ignoring knocks at the door. Days blurred together, one bleeding into the next. Sometimes I sat in the dark for hours, staring at Laura's photographs, whispering her name as if she might answer. Other times, I drowned myself in whiskey, the burn of it, the only thing that reminded me I was still alive. The company that once demanded every ounce of my attention no longer mattered. Contracts piled up unanswered. Meetings passed without me. I had once thrived on the noise of success, the constant movement, the adrenaline of building something bigger than myself. Now the very thought of walking into that office filled me with dread. What good was building an empire if the one person I wanted to share it with was gone? I tried once to return. I stood outside the glass doors of Cole Logistics, watching employees stream in and out. They moved with purpose, carrying files, tapping on phones, their lives intact. Inside, my name was still on the wall, etched in steel letters. Richard Cole, founder and CEO. For years, I had been proud of that. But as I stared at it now, it felt like a cruel joke. What did founder mean when I had lost the very foundation of my life? I turned away before anyone could see me. That was the last time I ever went near the office. Grief ate away at me in quieter ways too. I forgot to eat, skipped showers, let my appearance unravel. Suits that once fit perfectly hung loose on my frame. Neighbors avoided eye contact when they saw me in the hallway, their polite nods replaced with pity. I could feel myself slipping, becoming someone I didn't recognize. Nights were the worst. Dreams brought Laura back to me, whole and smiling, her laughter filling the air. For a few moments, I believed she was still alive, but waking was like losing her all over again. I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the crash, hearing the screams, feeling her hand in mine as she whispered those final words. Survivor's guilt gnawed at me constantly. Why had I lived while she died? Why had fate spared me only to strip me of everything else? I thought about the other passengers, about their families, about the empty chairs at their tables. I imagined Laura sitting among them, whole, happy, free of pain, while I was left behind, a broken man trapped in the wreckage of memory. The isolation became a prison. With no one to confide in, no one to lean on, my thoughts turned darker. I wondered if living was worth it. I imagined ways to end the silence, to join her. But each time something stopped me. A memory of her smile, the sound of her voice, the way she had held my hand. I couldn't dishonor her love by throwing away the life she had valued so much. So I survived. Barely. But survival without connection is just existing. And that's what I did. I existed, moving through days like a ghost, invisible to the world, haunted by grief, consumed by isolation. People looked at me and saw a man who had lost his wife. But what they didn't see was that I had lost myself too. And soon, grief would not be the only thing I carried. Because as the isolation deepened, the fortune I had once relied on began to crumble. For most of my life, money was the one constant. No matter how hard the day was, no matter how heavy the burden, I knew I had the security of wealth. But after the crash, that certainty began to slip away. At first it was subtle, a late bill here, an unexpected expense there. Then, like a dam breaking, it all came rushing down at once. The hospital bills were staggering. Even with insurance, the cost of surgeries, therapy, and medications drained accounts quickly. I had once written checks without a second thought. Now each invoice felt like a dagger, a reminder that survival came with a price tag I could no longer afford. Lawyers came next. They promised settlements, justice, compensation for Laura's death. But lawsuits drag on for years, and lawyers never work for free. Retainers, fees, court costs, it all piled up. Every month I signed checks that chipped away at the fortune I had spent decades building. Each signature felt like watching sand slip through my fingers. Then came the company. Without me at the helm, coal logistics faltered. Contracts fell apart. Clients turned to competitors. Board members, once loyal, pushed me out quietly, citing my inability to perform duties. They said it was sympathetic smiles, but beneath their words was calculation. To them, I was no longer an asset. I was dead weight. Dividends shrank, investments soured. Markets shifted against me. What once had been a mountain of wealth became a shrinking island, disappearing tide by tide. I tried to fight it. I sold assets, liquidated stocks, downsized where I could, but grief had left me paralyzed. For every move I made, three more problems rose in its place. The marble house was the first casualty. Its upkeep had always been costly, but after Laura died, it became unbearable. Every room was a memory, every corner a ghost. I told myself I was selling it because of finances, but the truth was, I couldn't stand living there without her. Still, handing over the keys was like cutting off another piece of myself. That house had been more than shelter. It was proof of everything I had achieved. Watching strangers move through its halls, pointing at fixtures, negotiating price felt like an insult. I moved into a smaller apartment, telling myself it was temporary. But even that became too much. Bills stacked higher than I could pay. Creditors called daily, their voices cold and relentless. I stopped answering the phone. Letters piled up unopened on the counter until I couldn't bear to look at them anymore. Friends who had once admired my success drifted away. Some avoided me out of discomfort, others out of fear that my misfortune might stain them. Invitations stopped coming. The dinners, the galas, the board meetings, all vanished. The wealth that had made me desirable had evaporated, and with it went the friendships that were never truly friendships at all. I learned quickly how conditional respect is. When you have money, people listen. They lean in when you speak, they laugh at your jokes, they call you sir and treat you like you matter. Without it, you're invisible. You're just another man in a wrinkled coat, mumbling excuses, begging for extensions. One by one, possessions disappeared. The cars were repossessed, the accounts drained, the retirement funds gone. I sold watches, jewelry, anything of value, each sale a humiliation. Laura's belongings I held on to as long as I could, but even those slipped away when desperation came knocking. The last thing I sold was her wedding ring. That day broke me in ways the crash never could. By the time the fortune was gone, I was no longer Richard Cole, the businessman. I was just Richard, the man who had lost his wife, his home, his wealth, and his purpose. The world saw me as a cautionary tale, a reminder of how quickly life could turn. Some pitied me, some mocked me, but most ignored me entirely. The cruelest part wasn't losing the money itself. It was realizing how much of my life had been built on it. Without wealth, the respect vanished. Without wealth, the friends disappeared. Without wealth, even a family kept their distance. I had thought money was just a tool, something I used to build a better life. But I saw now that it had been the glue holding everything together. And when it was gone, everything else fell apart. I once stood at the top of the world. Now I stood at the edge of the street, clutching a paper cup, hoping strangers might spare a few coins. That was the final lesson of fortune. It doesn't fade slowly. It collapses suddenly, leaving you with nothing but the echo of what you once had. They say a house is just walls and a roof, but anyone who has built a life in anyone knows better. A home is where your memories live. It is where your laughter lingers long after the jokes are forgotten, where the smell of dinners past seems to cling to the walls, where footsteps echo with the rhythm of family life. To me, our house wasn't just a building. It was the final proof that I had made it, that I had given Laura the life she deserved, which is why losing it cut deeper than I ever imagined. The letters started arriving first. Delinquent, overdue, final notice. I stacked them on the counter, unopened at times, too afraid of what they said. I told myself I'd figure it out, that money would come through from the lawsuits or the company or some hidden reserve I had forgotten. But deep down, I knew the truth. The house had become a weight I could no longer carry. One morning, there was a knock at the door. A man in a pressed suit handed me papers. Foreclosure. My stomach dropped as I scanned the words. each line a nail sealing the coffin of the life Laura and I had built. I wandered through the rooms after that, touching everything as if by touching it I could hold on to the memories. The living room where we had hosted friends, laughter spilling late into the night. The kitchen where Laura had tried new recipes, smiling when I teased her about using too much garlic. The bedroom where we whispered promises, where her side of the bed still seemed warm in my imagination. Packing was agony. Movers came, strangers handling the pieces of my life with clinical efficiency. They wrapped furniture in blankets, boxed up dishes, carried away photo albums that should have stayed on shelves forever. I tried to direct them at first, but eventually I just sat on the staircase, watching helplessly as my world was dismantled piece by piece. I saved one box for myself, photographs of Laura, a few keepsakes she loved, the last remnants of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else now. Everything else was tagged, loaded, sold. When the buyers came to tour the house, I stayed out of sight. I couldn't bear to see them walking through those rooms, pointing, planning their future in the very place where mine had ended. From the window, I caught a glimpse of them, a young couple, hopeful, smiling. I hated them for it, even though none of this was their fault. The final day came too quickly. I stood in the foyer, keys heavy in my hand, staring at the grand staircase one last time. I remembered Laura descending it on our anniversary, her dress flowing, her eyes sparkling as if we were young again. I remembered her sitting on the steps, tying her shoes before we went out, laughing when I teased her for taking too long. Every memory was a knife. I placed the keys on the counter and walked out the door. The click of it closing behind me felt like the end of a chapter I wasn't ready to finish. My new home was a cramped apartment in a rundown building. The walls were thin, the carpet stained, the air stale. Gone were the marble floors, the high ceilings, the light pouring through wide windows. This place felt temporary, like a waiting room for someone else's life. But even that didn't last. Rent was another bill I couldn't keep up with. One by my utilities shut off, electricity first, then water. I sat in the dark some nights, surrounded by silence, the shadows pressing in like reminders of everything I had lost. When the eviction notice finally arrived, I wasn't surprised. By then, I had already packed what little I still owned into 2 duffel bags. On the day I left, the landlord stood in the doorway, arms crossed, expression cold. "I gave you as much time as I could," he said. I nodded, too tired to argue. What was there to say? I dragged my bags down the cracked steps and out onto the street. For a moment, I just stood there looking up at the building. It wasn't much, but it had been a roof. Now even that was gone. Homeless. The words settled on me with brutal clarity. I had gone from marble mansions to apartments to nothing at all. The streets stretched before me, vast and unforgiving. I thought about Laura, about how horrified she would be to see me like this. A part of me was grateful she never had to. Another part longed for her so fiercely it was almost physical pain. That night, I slept on a bench for the first time. The wood was hard, the air biting, the city sounds unkind. I wrapped my coat around me, clutching the box of Laura's photos like a lifeline. People passed by, their eyes sliding past me as if I were invisible. In that moment, I understood fully. I had lost more than a house. I had lost the last shelter of dignity. Home wasn't walls and a roof. Home had been Laura. And without her, without that house, without the life we had built, I was adrift in a world that no longer had a place for me. The first night on the bench was the hardest, but it was far from the last. That splintered seat in the corner of the park, beneath a broken lamppost, became my new address. No mailbox, no walls, no key to turn in a lock, just open sky, cold air, and the realization that I had joined the ranks of the forgotten. Life on the streets is not living. It is surviving in fragments, one moment at a time. You think in hours, not days, and meals, not plans. You measure success by finding a dry place to sleep or a sandwich someone discards in a trash bin. And every step, every glance from strangers reminds you of what you've become. Mornings were brutal. The chill of the night seeped into my bones, and the rising sun offered no warmth. I would sit up stiffly, brush off leaves or dirt, and watch commuters hurry past in pressed suits and polished shoes. Once I had been one of them, rushing, focused, too busy to notice the man on the bench. Now I was the man no one noticed. Food was always a question. I learned where churches served hot meals, where soup kitchens opened their doors, where shopkeepers were kind enough to leave expired bread in bags by the back door. Some days I went hungry. Hunger sharpens you at first, then dulls you until it becomes a constant hum in the background of your existence. Hygiene became another battle. I sneaked into public restrooms to splash water on my face, used hand dryers to warm myself. On good days, I found a shelter with showers, but those were rare and crowded. The stares from others told me what I already knew. I smelled of sweat, of the streets, of failure. The hardest part, though, wasn't hunger or cold. It was invisibility. People passed me every day, their eyes deliberately sliding past, as if seeing me would contaminate them. Some muttered under their breath, others tossed coins without meeting my gaze. The rare ones who looked directly at me often did so with pity, which cut almost as deeply as disgust. Children sometimes pointed. "Why is that man sleeping there, Mommy?" The mothers always pulled them away quickly. "Don't look." That phrase haunted me. I used to command attention. Now I was something not to be looked at. Nights were the cruelest. Darkness magnifies everything, the cold, the fear, the loneliness. I lay awake listening to footsteps, to laughter that wasn't mine, to the occasional shouts of others wandering the streets. I clutched Laura's photos close, whispering her name, reminding myself I had once been loved, once been someone. There were others like me, of course, men with stories, women with scars, all reduced to the same label, homeless. We shared benches, corners, advice. Don't sleep near the river, it floods. Avoid the alley on 12th, too dangerous. The church on Main serves soup at 6. We were a community of the invisible, bound not by choice but by circumstance. Sometimes we talked. I met a man named Carl who had been a mechanic before his shop went under. He showed me how to keep shoes from falling apart with duct tape. There was Maria, once a teacher, who carried books in her bag and read aloud to anyone who would listen. Our conversations were lifelines, brief reminders that we were still human. But even among them, I felt apart. My story was different. I had been rich, I had been powerful, I had flown across oceans, owned homes, sat at head tables, and now I sat beside them, shivering, begging. I wondered if they judged me for falling so far, or if they simply didn't care. On the streets, your past doesn't matter, only your hunger, your cold, your survival. Police patrols treated us like pests. "Move along," they barked, shining flashlights in our eyes at midnight. If we lingered too long, they threatened arrests. Shelters were overcrowded, beds scarce. More nights than not, I returned to that bench under the lamppost, my home in a world that no longer wanted me. The shame was constant. Every time someone dropped a coin in my cup, I wanted to shout I was Richard Cole. I owned fleets of trucks. I signed million-dollar contracts. I was a husband. I mattered. But the truth was, in their eyes, I didn't matter now. I was just another man who had lost his way. And yet, through all of it, I kept breathing. Some small, stubborn part of me refused to give in completely. Laura's voice lingered in my memory, her laughter, her faith in me, her final words. She had loved me when I was at my highest. Could I honor her by surviving at my lowest? That question kept me moving. One step, one breath, one day at a time. Life on the streets stripped me bare. It took away money, dignity, even my name. But it also showed me something I had never understood before. The fragility of life, the cruelty of fate, and the resilience hidden deep within us when we have nothing left. I had lost my wife in a plane crash, my fortune to circumstance, my home to debt. And yet somehow I was still here. Not living, not thriving, but surviving. When everything else is stripped away, wealth, home, reputation, you're left staring at yourself in the rawest form. And for the longest time, I didn't like the man staring back at me. I saw failure, weakness, a man who had let his wife die while he lived. I saw a man who had squandered fortune, who had fallen from marble floors to broken benches. I saw shame, but the longer I walked these streets, the more I began to realize something. Survival itself is not shameful. Survival in its simplest form is courage. I often sit by the fountain in the city square. People hurry past, carrying lattes, briefcases, phones pressed to their ears. Sometimes they don't see me at all. Other times they glance, frown, and move on quickly. But every now and then, someone pauses. A woman places a sandwich in my hands. A teenager drops a bottle of water beside me. A man in a suit, perhaps remembering his own losses, presses a bill into my palm and whispers, "Stay strong." It's in those moments that I understand. I am still human. I am still Richard Cole. Not the CEO, not the man in the tailored suit, not even the husband I once was, but a man nonetheless, breathing, hurting, surviving. The grief never leaves. Nights are still long, haunted by the memory of Laura's face, her voice whispering, "I love you," as the world collapsed around us. Sometimes I close my eyes and almost feel her hand in mine again, soft and steady. When I wake and find only empty air, the loss hits fresh, like the crash happened yesterday. That pain is permanent. It's stitched into me as deeply as my scars. But grief has taught me something I never learned in boardrooms or business deals: the value of presence. I used to measure life in profits, in contracts signed, in expansions and acquisitions. Now I measure it in small mercies: a hot meal, a dry blanket, a kind glance from a stranger who doesn't look through me. People think homelessness erases you, and in many ways it does. My old friends don't call. My name no longer opens doors. To the world, I am invisible. But invisibility has given me a strange gift: clarity. When no one is watching, you see yourself more clearly than ever before. What remains of me now is not wealth. The money is gone. It is not status. The company belongs to someone else. It is not home. The marble house, the apartment, they belong to other families now. What remains is the story. My story. And that story is this: I loved a woman with all my heart. I built a fortune from nothing. I flew too close to the sun, and in one fiery moment, I lost it all. Yet here I am, still breathing, still speaking, still carrying her memory. Sometimes I wonder what Laura would think if she could see me now. Would she be ashamed? Would she pity me? Or would she simply take my hand and remind me, as she always did, that life is not measured in titles or possessions, but in the way we endure? I like to believe it would be the last. I am not the man I was. I never will be again. But I am still here. And as long as I am, Laura's love lives on in me. One day, perhaps, I'll find a way to rise again. Maybe not to wealth, maybe not to marble floors, but to something quieter, steadier, dignity. Until then, I will keep telling my story. Not for sympathy, not for pity, but for truth. Because behind every man on a bench, every woman with a cardboard sign, there is a story. A life once lived, a love once cherished, a loss once endured. That is what remains. Not the house, not the money, not the company. What remains is me,